So this is the academic session. 5 papers, 8 minutes each. New fresh ideas coming from research and evidence, of course, for policymakers. Everything is recorded, so it will be, of course, worldwide propagated. So we start with Christina Dargenidou and Jan Marton. Christina Dargenidou from Exeter University and Jan Marton from Gothenburg Business School, or Gothenburg University, I think. And the first paper would be on, can we move to the slides, please? Okay, that's it. Consistency between capitalized and expense intangible investments. You got 8 minutes, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This project started as part of the discussions that we had with the European...
You should speak in the mic.
Yeah, with the EAA group.
Take this close. Okay?
All right. So, it's together with Jan Marton, who will join us online, and Janice Denoncourt and Clemence Garcia. I mean, of course, the paper is between me and Jan, who are more quantitative people. And this is kind of an early days, but I thought we would like to share the ideas in the test we have run so far. So what it is about? The question is whether we apply the correct methods to different types of outlays for intangibles. Okay, so hence the word consistency. Consistency is not comparability, it's slightly different. So it refers to the use of same methods for the same items or different methods for different items. And we are working on outlays for intangible capital. And these outlays could be either expensed or capitalized. Right, so are we doing the correct thing so far? And what could be improved? So we are running a small test for the moment. And as I say, early days, we are going to expand and perhaps alter, this design eventually. That's research for you. So we do have a ratio. Okay, the ratio is outlays for acquired intangibles against the total investment of a company within a year in intangibles. And we claim that, the heavier is the intangible investment in what we call capitalized intangibles, the more future benefits we should really see imminently, with certainty. And let me take you to the most important, direction here, the more certain, okay? So uncertainty is a big element for us. So we do find this in the test. We find that the larger proportion of acquired capitalized intangibles is associated with lower volatility in future benefits. Now, future benefits, for the moment, they stand for margins, gross profit margins. I mean, of course, we are going to expand this further. So where does this leave us? Okay, so we're doing the correct thing. So what is the whole question about intangibles? Because, the whole conference today has really put the problem. But now where we are. Our idea is that, actually, these outlays for acquired intangibles or internally developed intangibles may not be very, very different. But it all depends on the maturity that the company has with respect to these internally developed projects. So we run this test, and what we find in this test is that, in companies that they have longer track record maturity of internally developed intangibles, this is how we specify that, the outlays that we typically expense become more and more like the outlays that we typically capitalize. So they become similar. So that is not consistent. It becomes gradually not consistent. And here it is. we believe that our results so far point to a threshold after which, these outlays could be capitalized. Okay, before that, not really. But after we break the threshold, yes, we can do that. So this is something that we would like to elaborate a bit further, in future research on this project to find out. Now, and what does it tell us about public policy? Well, as I say, this work has started with the discussion with the EAA Intangibles Study Group. And the one idea that has been proposed in this paper, the Accounting for Intangibles paper, is that, we need disclosure, and we need disclosure of the past investments in intangibles to be able to assess them and figure out whether we have reached this point of threshold or not. So it's really about studying the past to determine the future. So this is where we stand. We will update you about future results.
Thank you so much, Christina. So basically, the idea would be that the two internally generated and acquired, they're not so different in terms of uncertainty over a certain point in time.
Yes, but there is a threshold. There's
a threshold.
And once the threshold is complete and, meets the uncertainty threshold, then, of course, then we can start talking about putting things on the balance sheet. But before we jump to this very, very drastic solution, I would really support any efforts for further disclosure. And this disclosure is to enable users of financial reporting to figure out whether this uncertainty threshold has been reached or not.
Been reached or not. You know that you're speaking under the control of that gentleman. Who is that guy on the picture? Is Luca Pacioli is the famous Naples painting. So we have a responsibility as academics. Thank you, Christina, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the research. You and Jan. I think we have Jan on board. Professor Jan Marton. Hey, good to see you, Jan.
Hello. Can you hear?
Perfectly. Yeah. You have some slides as well.
Yeah.
That are going to be. So I forgot to say before, and thanks, Christina, for reminding me. This is the EAA, the European Accounting Association Study Group. The European Accounting Association Study Group that on intangibles. That's been formed 1 year, 1.5 ago, and so we're working together to push the frontiers, of course, of research in terms of intangibles.
Okay, so it was nice to see the group in Brussels. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm in a hotel room in Stockholm, and the light here is not perfect for transmitting video. And it's so far north, the sun goes down at 3 p.m. So that's where we are. So it looks a little dark here. Anyway, it's nice to see you. So this is a joint work with me and a colleague from Switzerland, Catalin Starica. And the research question and setup, the question that we address has been argued or debated for a quarter of a century, basically. Does the recognition of investments in intangible assets make earnings more useful for stock market investors? It's a basic question. In this paper, we assess usefulness through the association between earnings and stock returns. As a background, I should say that both theory and practice suggests that valuation of firms is based on estimates of future discounted cash flows. And that these future cash flows are a measure of future firm performance. So basically what we're getting down to is we want to estimate future performance. So what does measures of current performance tell us about this future performance? And the measures we right now have about current performance is either earnings or cash flows. The difference between earnings and cash flows is accruals. So, and the standard setters are in a setting where they have to prescribe rules for accruals. So that's basically what they do in recognition and measurement. What accruals to prescribe. So we're comparing the usefulness of earnings and cash flows as a way to measure or assess the usefulness of accruals. And the specific accrual we're interested in is, does it help to recognize investments in long-term assets, intangible assets being one of these long-term assets? I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah. Basically, the findings we have indicate that earnings, where all the effects of investments in long-term assets are removed, are more useful than cash flows. And investments in long-term assets, it's both tangible and intangible assets. So when you remove the effects of those assets, you get useful earnings. However, if you take operating income after depreciation and amortization, the earnings are not more useful than cash flows. So this indicates that depreciation, impairment, all these kind of things are not useful to investors. So that is not informative. So our take on this would be that recognition of assets, recognition of investments in intangibles would be useful to the extent that it separates investments from current items. However, it would not be useful as a matching device. And with matching device, I mean that often you accountants would like to see depreciation or amortization as a matching of expenses to the consumption of the resource. But if investors do not care about this depreciation and amortization, the question is, how effective is this matching actually? We can go to the next slide. So finally then, what are the implications for standard setters about this? Well, our suggestion is that requiring recognition of intangible assets would be one way to identify or inform investors about the investment portion of expenses. But it would be a very costly way. It's costly in the sense that even if you recognize investments in intangible assets, there would be some assets that are not recognizable. So you would have a classification issue, a remaining classification issue. If you recognize the assets in the balance sheet, you have to come up with useful life, amortization method, and so on. And also you would have to make subsequent impairment tests. And as has been said here several times, and also by Christina, probably it would be more, it would be better from a cost perspective to have disclosure instead. So this, for example, disclosure about future-oriented expenses would be a good way to provide the necessary information, while recognition would not. So that is the final word from Stockholm. The last slide is just questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So once again, thank you, Jan, for this important findings. So basically, both the paper, the previous paper with Christina and your paper with a Swiss colleague, are pointing to the direction that up to a point at least, there's a cost-efficient way to provide necessary information for markets will be disclosure, not recognition.
Exactly.
Which is, I think, it's an important finding for especially next year, that of course there will be lots of talking about intangibles more and more also in the accounting world. So thank you for that. Thank you for respecting perfectly the time. So now we go to the third colleague, and Laura Girella. I'm not sure that is the right one. No, in fact, we just can we move to the fourth one and we exchange? Yeah. Can we? No, because we moved to Janice first, because Janice Denoncourt, the file has been, we need to switch file. So Janice is producing an interesting paper about, as you see, quite articulated, corporate governance, intangible assets, connectivity, with a particular perspective on trademark law and sustainability to regulate greenwashing risks. I hope you can be able in 8 minutes to represent that. Thank you, Janice, for being here with us.
Thank you, Stefano, and thank you to the World Intellectual Capital Initiative. Yes, I'm also part of this European Accounting Association study group. Of course, I'm not an accountant. I come from a corporate law background. I'm a qualified trademark attorney, although I don't practice. So I do have some understanding of these concepts and the connectivity. What I wanted to highlight initially is some of the concerns from the market regulators about this topic of greenwashing. So, we do have problems explaining our credentials to the market in terms of how we are adapting to the new emerging sustainability law. And greenwashing apparently undermines corporate accountability towards stakeholders and the credibility of companies' environmental initiatives. And some of our corporate regulators have gone so far as to acknowledge the negative impact of greenwashing on our sustainability efforts and expenditure, of course. So you've got the UK Financial Conduct Authority, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. We heard earlier from a colleague from the European Securities and Markets Authority, all about greenwashing misleading consumers, which erodes trust in all ESG products. The UK recently introduced its Environmental Act, which is a landmark piece of legislation. And I'll give you a quote here from the US SEC commissioner, who said greenwashing can mislead investors as to true risks, rewards, and pricing of investments. So there's clearly a concern in this space. Now, coming from a trademark background, obviously a trademark is a very common form of intangible. It's one of the big 5 intangibles, you could even go to say. But we found that the number of trademarks with green characteristics, i.e. the word green, green color, blue for ocean, lots of different ways in which you can register marks with these characteristics, has increased in the EU through the registration of EU trademarks that cover the whole of the EU territory by 10 to 12% year on year in the last few years. So I saw this study being an IP lawyer, a trademark attorney, and I thought, oh my goodness, let's think about the corporate governance implications of this, because there is this intersection of the information value that trademarks signal to the market. And from a corporate governance perspective or from an accounting perspective, you're providing some qualitative information. It's not a new form of non-financial information. Traditionally, you've mainly focused on valuing the trademark, the house brand, the product brands to come up with a figure. Or on the other hand, you've reported the risks involved, perhaps trademark infringement, litigation. But the greenwashing risk to the companies are clearly acknowledged by the regulators, and yet the trademark dimension is a bit absent. So I'm hoping to add that to this debate, because the scale of greenwashing in another report that I've located indicates that the marketing communications, 40% of them have some kind of misleading, false information, hence the concerns. So I think the information that's being disseminated requires much more guidance. We do have emerging in different territories, lots of different guidance. The Dutch have issued regulations around the world. There's many different forms, but it's very piecemeal, very patchwork. And there is no common principles. I mean, there are some obviously common sense. You want it to be true, not misleading, but there are ways that it's being done that make it a little bit more gray. Nevertheless, it has an impact on valuation of the brand, on connecting the green mark with the specific product or service that the companies are reporting on. So, a large company may have thousands of trademarks, but it may be the top 20 in their portfolio that generate the most recognition with consumers. So the way in which they're used has to be looked at quite carefully. So that's where the intersection with corporate governance, reporting on products and services, and the revenue income streams, together with the investment in the trademarks to protect those, to promote them, and the claims they are making about their green credentials in terms of sustainability reporting. Now, of course, at the ISSB, they're looking at sustainability at a much more macro level, but from a management board of directors level, this is increasingly going to have to be part of their skill set. And we do have in many jurisdictions, but not all, a specific trademark attorney profession. And this is their area of expertise. Because as an intangible asset or intangible resource, a trademark can exist in perpetuity forever, as long as you renew it every 10 years. So it has the potential to become a very long, an asset with a lot of longevity, for which a lot of value is attributed. And any risk through greenwashing claims or litigation, which is currently beginning, could really seriously impact its value. And we heard from IP valuers earlier that we don't have a regulated IP valuation profession, but what we do have is we have an ISO standard of trademark valuation. So I'm pulling together a few strings here. It's foundational.
You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
It's foundational. But the idea is that who is going to exercise leadership at an international level for regulating greenwashing, because greenwashing for particularly large companies has potential global implications. The ISB sounds to me like it would be the right organization, but maybe it's more focused on some of the macro level issues like CO2 at the moment. That's not to say these other qualitative communication issues in corporate reporting are not going to rear their ugly heads increasingly. So thank you very much.
Thank you for raising this issue. Clémence.
Me?
Laura Girella will be the last ones to punish her. So can we move to the last, and after we swap, we would like to get Clémence Garcia paper. Thank you, Janice. Hopefully this should be Clémence. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a joint paper with my colleague Janice and another colleague from the same research group, which is Alberto Quali from the University of Genoa, and who is not with us today. The paper is about digital reporting. And as you already know, digital reporting is structured digital reporting, which means that the items to be disclosed in most jurisdictions must be disclosed in a certain order with a certain type of items that is specified in advance. And for this kind of reporting, companies use XBRL in most cases. At least it's the case in Europe. So just a quick introduction. There is still little research on digital reporting because the type of reporting differs a little depending on jurisdictions, but there's an interesting evolution in the European Union, which is that companies must disclose and tag their narratives and their notes according to XBRL. So this use of a taxonomy implies a certain harmonization of the contents that you want to tag. You cannot just put a label of something that's not harmonized with other companies. And because of that, there's a small conflict with the principles-based approach of IFRS. You know that in IAS 38, there's some examples of intangible assets, but not a list that's very detailed or not even very precise definitions of these items. So in this research, we focused on intangible assets in the pharmaceutical companies. So it's an industry-specific sample. And we thought that this industry-specific aspect could be a good reference for future developments regarding, for example, the sustainability reporting for industry-specific requirements. And this includes the UK and Switzerland. So we collected data from the annual reports about intangible assets. We checked which kind of intangibles they use, and we compared this data with the XBRL taxonomy. So something that you already know, but it's nice, I think, to remind you, in the pharmaceutical companies, about half of intangible assets are goodwill. So this is the blue part. And the yellow part is marketing intangible assets. I just wanted to say that in the pharmaceutical companies, there's a lot of customer-related intangible assets, and this kind of intangible assets are a little less well-defined legally than other types of intangible assets. Okay, so for the XBRL taxonomy, the taxonomy that I'm using for the research is the one that is on the website of the IASB. And in some jurisdictions, there are a little more precise taxonomies. But the one that's based on the examples of the IASB is not precise or not very precise. And some tags include several types of intangibles together. So let me move on because we want to hear the last paper. The findings. In fact, if you take the sample of pharmaceutical, yeah, but still that's important for the other paper. So about the findings. In the sample, there were several patterns of disclosure of intangible assets. And the way that big pharma present their intangibles is completely different, or at least very, very much aggregated compared with companies for which the weight of intangibles may be less than the big pharmas. And this is a little surprising, but the reason for this kind of disclosure is that they are doing a lot of acquisitions. So at some point you need to aggregate and present information in a way that's understandable for the readers. So for these companies, usually they use a grouping of intangible assets by functions, like for example, product intangibles, marketing intangibles, etc. That's not very detailed. And these categories just do not exist in XBRL. So it's difficult to tag if you don't have the right tag. A second issue for middle-sized pharma companies is that the disclosure of intangible assets is by nature, so for example, patents, licenses, etc. But the categories are overlapping with each other or they are merged with each other. So when you see, for example, patents and licenses, you cannot read the amount of patents, neither the amount of licenses. So there's a problem of overlapping of categories. And the third kind of issues that we can find with that we can find with these practices is that some companies make very specific or very big acquisitions, and they want to give some details about the intangibles that are purchased. For example, if Sanofi purchases Aventis, they want to disclose Aventis research and development separately from their own research and development. And for this kind of details, of course, the details are lost when you tag the information. So this is what we found in this research, and the implications in just a few minutes. The first thing is that for intangibles, and especially for intangibles intensive companies intangibles, because there's a lot of information, it is difficult to tag. There's a lot of categories, and this is a real dilemma. Oh no, this is not the right slide. Yes, so these are the implications. So this is a dilemma. The things that need more tagging are more difficult to tag. And this is why there really needs an effort to develop either in the accounting standard or in the reporting standard. EESF is the European reporting standard. This at either the accounting or tagging level, there should be a harmonized terminology with non-overlapping categories and with categories that have precise definitions and scope. And the second aspect is that, of course, there's larger companies, smaller companies. So smaller companies need maybe less reporting than larger companies. So there needs more granularity. So thank you very much. I will leave the time for the last paper.
Thank you for your presentation, first of all. I'm sorry for the technical hiccups. Well, can I have a question? But it's interesting because you're saying tagging will produce, of course, a pressure towards harmonization. But at the same time, we don't have the tags for intangibles. So in a sense, it's a bit of a, catch-22. So is that, did I understand correctly?
Yes, completely. And this study is industry specific. So there's
pharmaceutical.
Yeah, so it's not as if we did a survey on all the different industries, but at some point, if there's not a certain level of harmonization, you cannot exploit information efficiently.
So tagging will be an important leverage for harmonization and for reporting on intangibles. Pity is that there are no tags for that.
Completely.
Which is a little bit interesting. Thank you very much once again, and Clemence, I'm very sorry on behalf of technical aspects. And last but not least, Professor Laura Girella with a different hat, no more from the IFRS Foundation, but from basically as an academic, as professor at the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia in Italy. The floor is yours. We're running 1 minute late.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stefano. So this is a project that is part of a wider project that has been funded by the Institute of a Chartered Accountant of Scotland, also with the support then from FAS and FREG. And the idea is really to understand the usefulness of disclosure on unaccounted intangibles from two kind of different perspectives, one being the perspective of CFOs, so the preparers basically, and the other one is the perspective of the user. So the starting point is really that we know that intangibles are important. What we don't know is whether unaccounted intangibles, information on unaccounted intangibles are considered useful or not from these two different perspectives. One of the biggest issues then is that there are no data. While there are data on accounted intangibles, that is not the case on unaccounted intangibles. So how we have been doing in order to basically deal with this project and this with problem is that we have been basically firstly launched an international survey in order really to understand what are the views of users and preparers, but then this was a survey that was open to all the possible stakeholders, specifically on unaccounted intangibles. And we have been basically asking them a set of quite articulated questions, starting from what is the level of satisfaction with the current situation with IAS 38, but then going down a little bit more in depth, understanding also questions around whether there is a need for auditing of this type of information, what is the level of overlap, as we discussed since this morning, between information on unaccounted intangibles and ESG, and so on and so forth. So first big step has been to launch this international survey that has been basically open for 1 year in 2022, and also to note that by that time the CSRD wasn't out there. yet. The second one, we wanted to investigate a little bit more, so go in depth, especially to understand those areas where we noticed there were conflicting views from the survey. And we have been doing so via two focus group. So we have been convened one group of users and then one group of preparers, asking them questions and their views on the most conflicting views that we have been noting during, and that resulted from the international survey. So really, this really helped us in order to collect a lot of information on what is considered useful information on unaccounted intangibles from users and preparers. Here on the left-hand side of the slide, you have the profile of the respondents. So in total, 314 individuals participated in the survey, and then you can see also the breakdown. So basically, the majority of respondents, if you just focus on preparers and users, were preparers coming especially from unlisted companies and large companies. Why? When it comes to the profile of the users who have been participating to the survey, there was kind of a spread between buy-side analysts, asset managers, and sell-side analysts. So what kind of the views that we collected through, as I said, both the survey and then the focus groups? Intangibles are still a problem, and especially information on unaccounted intangibles is still a problem. We also try to understand what are the categories of intangibles that are recognized as the most important that are currently missing from traditional financial statement. And so we kind of got the view that for preparers, this type of information are about R&D, human capital, and intangibles related risks and opportunities. And then when it comes to users, the categories of intangibles that are missing from today's financial reporting are about IP, know-how, and intangibles related risks and opportunity. We also wanted to understand what is the preferred measurement basis. So we kind of, you can see there are some preferences both from preparers and users when it comes to financial measurement of particular information of intangibles. But then we also found that there is a convergence between users and preparers on the use of costs, for example, for information on R&D, fair value for brands and intellectual property, and value in use for human capital. Other views that we collected, where this type of information should be positioned. So basically, there was a convergence from both users and preparers that it is best to locate this type of information in those kind of sections that are kind of supporting the traditional financial statement. So for example, the supplementary notes to the financial statement, but also what used to be the non-financial reporting statement, but also forms like integrated report and management commentary. And this is also quite consistent with the type of framework and standards that are considered as most useful in order to provide information on unaccounted intangibles. So there was a quite of convergence on the use of the IA framework for the reason that was also illustrated in the previous panel, but also a possible revised version of IS 38, depending on what the IASB decide to do, and the EU non-financial reporting directive. In terms of the form of disclosure, so how this type of information should be disclosed, there was a convergence around the fact that there should be a combination of narrative information, KPIs, and financial figures. But it was also interesting to note the last 3 points. So there is really a need for auditing of this type of information, even if actually at that time, now with ISA 5000, maybe the situation might be a little bit more different. At that time, a proper standard for audit this type of information was considered still missing. Also interesting insights when it comes to the level of overlapping between information on ESG and information on unaccounted intangibles, because for users, the overlap exists quite strongly, but that is not really the case for preparers. And one interesting view that we got is about the fact that for some people, so for both users and preparers, intangibles are considered as a precondition of a good ESG performance. So for example, if you have a good practice in place within your organization, so belonging to the so-called organizational capital, that is going to help you to deliver a good environmental performance. And then the last point is really about the need for some form of standardization, so or a guidance of or whatever document it can be. Key observations and policy implication to close. So it is important to note that despite there were convergences, the professional role played by users or preparers still play a role on the usefulness, on the perceived usefulness of this type of information. In terms of the type of company, we noticed that a standardized intangibles related disclosure should be required on a mandatory basis, starting maybe with large listed companies, while SMEs needs a little bit more of encouragement and incentive to provide this type of disclosure. And last but not least, it could be useful, especially for standard setters. It's about what I was saying before, where this type of information should be located, which is, as I said before, in forms like a management commentary, MD&A type of report or integrated report.
Thank you very much. So now we have to move downstairs for the final part. And thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, Jan. And these gentle ladies we made them nearly a miracle. 5 papers from academics in 40 minutes. Believe me, it's a miracle. Thank you for your attention. Let's go downstairs to finish.